Just weeks after announcing a major multi-billion-dollar investment from Amazon, the information reports that Anthropic is back in talks with Google for another $2 billion round that would value the company between $20 billion and $30 billion. Welcome back to the AI Breakdown. Well, Anthropic has dominated the news for the last week, and interestingly, they are back in the headlines again. Today, we're going to talk through the new report, as well as explore what it says about the state of the competition for foundation models. Now, just to bring you up to speed with recent developments, on September 25th, Amazon and Anthropic announced a major collaboration that included an initial $1.25 billion investment into Anthropic that could be expanded up to $4 billion, as well as a collaboration with Amazon Web Services. Andy Jassy tweeted, "Excited to share we're expanding our collaboration with Anthropic. AWS will now be Anthropic's primary cloud provider and help build, train, and deploy its future foundation models on Trainium and Infertia chips." Many very reasonable people then started to outline the new parameters of the AI battle as Microsoft plus OpenAI, Google plus DeepMind, Tesla plus xAI, Meta plus its internal Meta AI, and now Amazon and Anthropic. Now, one thing that Anthropic was clear on was that, as they put it, as part of the investment, Amazon will take a minority stake in Anthropic. Our corporate governance remains unchanged and will continue to be seen by the long-term benefit trust in accordance with our responsible scaling policy. In some ways, I read that as them specifically saying this isn't quite as close as, for example, Microsoft and OpenAI might be. Well, putting a fine point on that is this new report from The Information that Amazon is talking about a fresh $2 billion round that would be led by Google and others. Now, it's important to note that Google is already an investor in Anthropic. In 2022, Google bought around 10% of the company. Now, the previous fundraise for Anthropic from March, which was of course before this Amazon investment, had valued Anthropic at around $4 billion, but according to the information sources, the company is now seeking a valuation of between 20 and 30 billion. If they were to get that, it would represent a 200x multiple on the company's current $100 million revenue run rate. Now, just by way of comparison, should they successfully complete this raise at that valuation, they would be at a significantly higher ARR multiple than even OpenAI at this reported $80 to $90 billion round, given that OpenAI is now reportedly at a $1 billion annual run rate. Now, that said, Anthropic's revenue is apparently growing fast. Sources close to the company said that by the end of this year, Anthropic is projecting that it will generate revenue at a $200 million annualized rate, or around $17 million a month, and that by the end of next year, it hopes to be at a $500 million annualized rate, or more than $40 million a month. Importantly, one of the reasons that they're projecting that amount of growth is this deeper tie-up with Amazon, which will see Amazon's Bedrock push Anthropic to cloud customers in a more direct way. Now, in terms of how much Amazon is setting the valuation, apparently their investment was done in the form of a convertible note, which turns into stock at the next fundraising round. The information sources also made it seem like a big deal for Amazon was the ability to get their specialized server chips into a major player like Anthropic as a way to start competing against NVIDIA's GPUs. Kind of stating the obvious, the information writes, if Anthropic raises more money from Google, it would raise questions about how the startup plans to split its allegiance between the two rival cloud providers. Now, one interesting thing that could explain why these companies are trying to raise so much money so fast comes from Anthropic's pitch deck, which reportedly reads, "We believe that companies that train the best 2025-26 models will be too far ahead for anyone to catch up in subsequent cycles." In other words, that there is a very distinct moment in the history of the evolution of the artificial intelligence space that will mint winners and losers, and that effectively right now is the only chance anyone really has to compete. Now, of course, the other interesting dimension to this battle is the degree to which all of these big tech companies have different philosophies on how the AI space in general should evolve. As we reported recently, and once again from The Information, apparently a lot of the tense conversations happening behind closed doors in Washington, D.C. have to do with what the right approach to open source AI will be going forward. Here's how The Information summed up the friends and foes of open source AI. In the pro-open source column, they put Meta and Databricks. They summed up Meta saying, says licenses are not appropriate for current generation of AI models. Released Llama 2, a cutting-edge open source LLM over the summer. And indeed, it appears from this reporting and from just basically any other conversation that we've read, that part of what has put such a fine point on this question around open source is how fast it's evolving thanks to initially the leak of Llama 1 and then the release of Llama 2. Moving back to where company stands, Databricks, they say, says open source AI should not be unduly restricted by regulation. Now, somewhere in the middle are Microsoft and Google. Microsoft, they write, has supported requiring companies to obtain licenses before releasing models. but released Phi 1.5, an open-source LLM, in September, and Google, they say, has not indicated whether it supports requiring government approval for launching open-source LLMs. Its last open-source release was in December 2022. And the companies that are against open-source AI, Anthropic and OpenAI, share common cause here. OpenAI, the information says, wants companies to obtain government approval before releasing highly capable AI models. It points out that they have not open-sourced an LLM since 2019, and in fact, Sam Altman has said explicitly that they were wrong about their approach to open-source AI. Anthropic, the information characterizes as opposing open-source cutting-edge AI, supports independent evaluation for safety of models prior to release, including by the US government, has not open-sourced its AI. Now, as the article points out, this is not just a principal question about whether open source should be allowed or not. In fact, it's much more of an implementation question of answering things like, if policymakers agree that some models are too powerful but other models aren't, how are those lines drawn? What is the process for determining whether a model is too powerful or not? Now, one of the folks who also thinks that we shouldn't be as open as we are with open source AI is former Google DeepMind co-founder Mustafa Suleyman, who's now the co-founder and CEO of Inflection. Last month, he put out a book called The Coming Wave: Technology, Power, and the 21st Century's Greatest Dilemma. In August, before his book came out, he stirred up controversy by tweeting, "The last century was defined by how quickly we could invent and deploy everything. This century will be defined by our ability to collectively say no to certain technologies. This will be the hardest challenge we've ever faced as a species. It's antithetical to everything that has made civilization possible to date. For centuries, science and technology have succeeded because of an ideology of openness. This culture of peer review, critical feedback, and constant improvement has been the engine of progress powering us all forward. But with future generations of AI and synthetic biology, we will have to accept that this process needs an update. Figuring out how to delicately do that without trashing innovation and freedom of thought will be incredibly hard. But left unchecked, naive open source in 20 years' time will almost certainly cause catastrophe." Physicist and AI founder Kevin Fisher writes, "The voice of an authoritarian. Y Combinator President Gary Tan said, 'Lost me at banning open source and matrix multiplication.' Bad look and feels grifty." Now, John Carmack, the former CTO at Oculus, had a more nuanced review of the book. He tweeted, "This is written without any wild-eye fear-mongering, and I like some of the historical perspectives, but he is clearly a statist. He previously worked in government, expresses concern for the government almost as often as concern for people, and wants to see powers expand in scope and across national borders. There is an undercurrent of, we obviously can't let the peasants have crossbows. I also don't like the bundling of biotech risk and AI risk. It feels like a big tent play to raise more concern and grow more levers of power." At the end, he suggests making high-end open-source AI work illegal and imposing censorship on the dissemination of prohibited AI research. Cheers for openly saying what you want instead of leaving it all vague, but I am not aligned. Stability AI CEO Ahmad Mustaq quote tweeted that tweet and said, "I agree largely with John here and would actually go a bit further. Almost every argument I've seen made against open source AI is ignorant of history, logic, and technology. Those who give up the liberty this technology will enable for supposed safety will get neither." When someone asked him then why he had signed the statement saying mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority, Ahmad responded, "The danger of AI extinction is a threat that should be considered a global priority just in case. It is not nuclear-level tech overall, and things like dataset transparency and open source mitigate threats. Closed AI controlled by states with no alternative is the danger." Among people that agreed with Ahmad included Epic Games founder Tim Sweeney, who said, "Agreed. It's a new generation of unprincipled company leaders lobbying the government to prevent upstarts from competing with them. Thanks for keeping stability open." Now, this is obviously a growing contentious conversation, and when it comes to what normal people think, I thought Sabroshi.eth had a really honest point. They wrote, "Most of us simply do not understand the topic well enough to make any real judgment, which is a bit scary considering how huge the consequences might turn out to be. Can't blame people for being cautious." Now, the reason that I think it's worth revisiting this conversation around open source and AI safety in light of a larger Anthropic raise is sort of summed up by a point made on September 25th by Rune, who wrote, "Anthropic splitting off without a doubt accelerated AGI timelines." The point that he was making is the irony that Anthropic's leaders left OpenAI because they were concerned about their approach to AI safety, but in so doing simply increased competition, which almost inevitably will lead to faster evolutions in the space. I've called this before competitive accelerationism. It's quite clear from all this fundraising activity that the battle is getting more, not less intense, and that means that creating calm middle space for nuanced conversation about these questions is going to get nothing but harder. Hopefully we can create at least a little bit of that here in our small corner of the AI world. Lastly, one little side note for those of you who follow both crypto and AI, an incredible denouement to the FTX story is that among all of the crazy, random, dragon's treasure hoard of assets, as Michael Lewis put it, that Sam Bankman-Fried had between his personal accounts, Alameda, and FTX, was an investment in Anthropic. If this deal goes through and Anthropic is able to raise at that $20 to $30 billion valuation, that puts the stake that FTX owns at between $3 and $4.5 billion. It doesn't completely do it, but it comes fairly close to covering the hole owed to FTX customers. How wild is it to think that among the two big November 2022 events, the collapse of FTX and the launch of ChatGPT, the tailwinds from the latter might be so powerful that they help clean up the mess of the former. Pretty fascinating stuff, guys. But for now, that is going to do it for today's episode. If you enjoy this, if you like the AI breakdown in general, I would so appreciate it if you would subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a rating or a review. It makes a really big difference to how new people find the show, and I appreciate each and every one of you who has taken the time to do that. Until next time, guys, peace.